Uh, this is the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative's 56th webinar, and I am Teresa, and I'm joined by my colleagues today. We have Sam Tank and James Polidori, and we're presenting on behalf of the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. And our presenter today is Tom Alwin from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and he will be presenting European frogbit, an aquatic invasive plant often associated with Phragmites. So obviously we're all excited to get this started, but I'm going to go a little bit of an overview beforehand. For those who may not be familiar, I'm sure many of you are, but I just wanted to introduce the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. The collaborative is a partnership to link people, information, and action on non-native Phragmites. And the collaborative is coordinated jointly by the Great Lakes Commission and the USGS Great Lakes Science Center with funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And the collaborative facilitates communication among stakeholders across the region and assists in the development of management tools and programs, and serves as a resource center for information on Phragmites biology, management, and research. The collaborative is led by a multi-agency advisory committee and applies principles of collective impact to advance common agendas for the Phragmites management in the Great Lakes Basin. Oh, you can go back, Sam. The Phragmites Collaborative is working towards advancing member strategies that are outlined in our common agenda, which is what you're seeing here on the screen. The common agenda is a big step towards aligning our regional goals and establishing a shared vision for change. And we have the focus areas of our common agenda are very clear, and it's to clearly define the intention of the collaborative, develop a shared understanding of gaps and problem areas surrounding Phragmites, and highlight the areas and strategies that we're working on or wish to work on. And you can learn more about our regional efforts and how to get involved in the work that we do by visiting our website. Next. And a big component of our work, and one of the ways we engage with Phragmites managers, is through the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework, or as we call it here, is PAMF. So PAMF utilizes participatory science to provide data-driven Phragmites management guidance through an adaptive management framework. And basically just what that means is that we want to learn a way to understand what Phragmites managers are doing and turn that into data and annual guidance to help managers make effective and efficient management decisions. So if you're interested in the PAMP program, you can visit the URL on this website and we'll have a lot more information. And if any of you guys listening are interested or know people who'd be interested in joining PAMP and taking advantage of the guidance, we have a bunch of different, you can enroll, but there's a bunch of different ways to get information. So we have a virtual training course that you can follow the URL on the screen, and we have lots of training resources to help get started and answer questions. We also can answer any of your questions by emailing pamf@glc.org. And just to promote, because we do have a live training coming up, so if your agency colleagues are interested in the PAMP program, or just want to learn more about it, we have a virtual live training on May 25th from 10 to 12 Eastern Standard Time. And you can go to our website, which is at the bottom URL, which is kind of long, I apologize, but if you just go to Great Lakes Phragmites.net and Google search participant training, you'll be able to find it and you can register for the training. So, and in general, if you're interested in learning more about Phragmites management and research, we have a bunch of resources on our website, which includes management guidance and of course, recordings of all of our past webinars. You can also join our listserv we have, which connects you to hundreds of professionals. And we have a bi-weekly newsletter, which includes a quarterly research roundup of academic papers as well. You can join the newsletter and listserv by going to our website, and those are clear and on the front page. So, and additionally, today's webinar is recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is then posted onto our website. We record and post all of our past presentations, so we have a good list of past webinars that you should definitely check out if you're interested in any form of Phragmites research and management. You can do that by following the URL. And of course, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram and follow us at GLFrag. Okay, that was my little promotional spiel, but before we get to the actual webinar, I want to cover a few logistical items before the presentation. So just like all webinars, in order to minimize potential interruptions, we ask you keep yourself muted and your video off. This is being recorded, so of course, you know, if your video comes on, that will be recorded, and it helps save bandwidth for other attendees. This is definitely a very interactive webinar, so we definitely encourage you to write written questions for our speaker, and you may type them into the chat box anytime you have a question. You don't have to wait till the end. The chat bubble here is in that circle, so that's where you'll find the chat function, and you may submit questions for our Q&A, like I said, at any time. While we'll do our best to take all of our questions, if you have to leave the webinar early because it is recorded, you know, you have the chance to come back and listen to the recording. Hopefully you can hear your question being answered. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you're able to send a message directly on the chat box to one of our hosts. So that would be either me, Sam, or James. And so we'll help you figure out any of the difficulties tech-wise you're having. Okay, so that was my quick 5-minute spiel. I'm really excited to introduce today's presenter. Tom Alwin is an aquatic biologist in the Aquatic Invasive Species Program at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. His work focuses on prevention and early detection of aquatic invasive species in Michigan surface waters through outreach, education, and monitoring. So I'm gonna let you take it away now. So.
Right, good. Yeah, excited to be here with the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative, talk about something not Phragmites. As Teresa said, I'll be talking about European frogbit with you guys today. And there's kind of two good reasons to talk about it. One, it often co-occurs with Phragmites. So if you're out there working on Phragmites, there's a chance you'll run into European frogbit. But maybe more importantly is what was mentioned before is PAMF has now incorporated some European frogbit observations notations in the procedure. So, you know, if you guys are going to be out doing PAMF, I think it'd be good for you to know a little bit about European frogbit and maybe even consider doing some management of the species if you're also managing Phragmites. And I'll preface with my disclaimer here. I work within the state of Michigan, so my focus and my expertise is really on what happens mostly in Michigan, but a lot of it translates out into the rest of the Great Lakes region. But you know, there are some species that may be out there, some lookalike species in your state or province that are not in Michigan that I may not know much about. I do have my contact information on this cover slide, and so if you run into questions about frogbit or other aquatic invasive plants, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to try to answer them or maybe get you in touch with someone who can. So throughout the presentation, I've got this outline, and this will pop up as a transition between the different topics that I'll talk about, 7 basic broad categories here. My plan is for this to be about a half hour, 40 minutes of talking, so there should be time for questions. But I tend to get comfortable and ramble a lot while I talk. So Teresa or Sam, just give me a heads up if we're getting close on time or something like that. I don't think I'll go quite that long. But in addition, on each of the outline slides, I've thrown some sort of picture on there. Maybe it's topic related, maybe it's just a good frogbit or Phragmites looking picture. This one is some frogbit. You can see the hand there for scale, so you can get sort of a sense of the size of the leaves. We'll talk about identification a little bit more, but this one is really kind of just nice. You get a sense that's my hand, normal human-sized hand. So you can see they're, you know, $1/2, quarter-sized leaves in this particular population. But let's just get going into our first topic, which is Great Lakes distribution. So folks out there, you know, not necessarily from Michigan, where is frogbit found? And this is the map from the USGS. Pulled this up a couple of days ago, so it should be fairly updated and recent. But you can see frogbit much more prevalent on the eastern portions of the Great Lakes, but it has been making its way moving west. So the story that I know for the background on frogbit is it was originally planted in a garden in Canada, a public garden in a pond or something like that, and it managed to escape and has since been spreading through the Great Lakes and moving its way westward. For a long time, Michigan was the sort of western boundary, and it was that eastern side of the state. But as we've been doing more work in Michigan with frogbit, we've been trying to get inland, and just a couple of years ago, it popped up down in parts of northern Wisconsin on Lake Michigan. So it's definitely on the move, which is not great. But if you guys are working in any of these areas where there's dots, then you have frogbit near you. And if you're working in other areas, you might have frogbit and no one's just found it yet. So be on the lookout for it. And we'll talk about all that reporting and all that good stuff as we go along. So there's our first transition slide. We've done with Great Lakes distribution. That one is pretty quick. Some of these other ones will go a little longer. The picture here is a close-up of a European frogbit leaf, and there's some important characteristics. The rounded lobes for identification are very key. There's some lookalikes that have non-rounded lobes, and that's kind of the way you distinguish them. There's also an interesting veination. That's probably not the technical term, but that's what we're calling it, where it sort of has this semicircle or this horseshoe shape with the leaf veins. And that's pretty unique to European frogbit. So those two identification characters are maybe all you need to know in order to ID frogbit, but we'll give you a few more here in these next set of slides. So in this one, I want to talk to you guys about identification. I'll start I forget I have the pointer. I'll start here and we'll work our way around clockwise. So European frogbit is a floating aquatic plant. So the leaves are up on the water surface like you saw in that first outline slide, generally speaking, right on the water surface. Sometimes when it's growing in real shallow water or there's very dense frogbit growth, the leaves can be a little bit up out of the water surface, but that's not too common. And then there's also times where frogbit will be completely submerged, and that's usually when it's first emerging in the early parts of the summer. It comes up from seeds or turions, which we'll talk in a minute about, and those are submerged. So the plants leaves come out, and then they tend to float to the surface, but sometimes they get caught up in algae or other plants. So occasionally you'll see frogbit underwater, but the vast majority of the time it's a floating leaf plant. It is a rosette forming plant, so all the leaves, flowers, and roots come from one central point of the plant. And those leaves really are kind of the easiest initial identification characteristic. So those round lobes are really key. The sort of cleft in the leaf is also important. And I also mentioned the sort of circular portion of veins on the leaves. They're kind of round to heart shaped. They can vary a little bit depending on where they are. And they range in size, the smaller leaves being young plants or plants that are getting lots of sunshine. Those larger leaves, the ones that are upwards of 2 inches or 5 centimeters, those guys are generally plants that are in a shady area. So the leaves grow bigger for them to gather more light. But the leaves are really, for me, the key characteristic for spotting and identifying European frogbit. It is a plant that does produce flowers and seeds in Michigan and throughout the region. So the flowers are somewhat distinctive. They're white petals, 3 of them, and a yellow center. There are a few native aquatic plants that have similar flowers, but they don't have, those are all submersed aquatic plants, so they won't have the leaves and the flowers together. Yeah, I think that's good for flowers. The other reproductive structure is an asexual reproductive structure that frogbit forms, and those are called turions. You can see one sort of growing off the plant here, and then up in this subset, this is a small turion moving its way up to a sprouted plantlet. And this is a euro up here, which I suppose is someone from Europe took this picture. I tried to credit the pictures that I found on the internet. This one I've had for a while and I couldn't find it again. So apologize to whoever took it. You don't get credit today. But just so you know, euro is almost the exact same size as a quarter. So you can just imagine a quarter right there for a size description. And I sort of think of turions as being kind of like Tic Tacs. little guys that are produced when the plant is stressed. Generally, that's at the end of the season, and so it produces these turions to drop down to the bottom of the sediment when the plant dies. So European frogbit does not live through the winter. The adult plants all die as winter comes to the Great Lakes. And so it relies on those turions for coming back the next year, or to some degree seeds. And we'll talk more about reproduction later. Another part, actually, to step back to flower or to leaves, this is sort of the underside of the leaf. It can have sort of a pinkish or reddish hue to it sometimes, which is not really that identification important, but just kind of a fun fact about it. Moving along to talk about stems, which are really runners. That's the other way that European frogbit spreads and grows during the season, is it sends out runners where daughter plants form on those. So basically the same idea as a strawberry plant. So you have the parent plant, and it'll send out numerous runners, and each runner will develop a daughter plant, and then that daughter plant will send out runners, and it just grows and grows and grows as long as the conditions are right for it. And that's how it can get to high densities within a single season. And then the roots can be important for identification, only with a couple different lookalikes. So they're not really feathery, but they have fine root hairs on them. And generally they're just free floating in the water because it's a free floating plant. Although there are times where frogbit will be in an area where the water level drops and it'll get sort of stranded on a mud flat, in which case it will, as long as it stays moist enough, damp enough soil, it will continue to grow and produce turions and move itself to be able to keep the population alive the next year. Pretty good for that one. We'll talk a little bit now about a couple of different lookalike species that you may run across out in the field. The first one would be some different frogbit species. There's an American frogbit that is native to parts of the United States and even, I believe, the Great Lakes region. It is not native to Michigan and not a plant that I have any experience with. And then there's also one called Amazon frogbit, which is not out in the wild, and it's not winter hardy to my knowledge, wouldn't survive in the Great Lakes region, but it is often in the aquarium trade. And in Michigan, we've gotten a number of reports that someone is selling European frogbit, and then when we find the pictures or go to the place, they're selling Amazon frogbit. So this picture here on the right is American frogbit, and the difference between American frogbit and European frogbit, the flower, very distinctively different, looks like a little firework to me almost, as opposed to 3 very distinct petals and a yellow center. And then American frogbit has this spongy material on the bottom of the leaves. So this is sort of the bottom of the leaf, and this part sticks down. It's not a great picture, but it's the best one I could find on the internet. So that spongy material is not present on European frogbit. European frogbit just has flat, sort of normal shaped leaves. So between the spongy material and if it's flowering, you'll be able to tell the difference. And this is another photo of American frogbit, and this particular couple plants seem to have their stems out of the water a little bit. I'm not sure if that's normal for American frogbit or not, but that's what we see in that photo. Again, you see the flower being very different than European frogbit. And then this is actually Amazon frogbit, which looks also very similar to European frogbit. If I were to give you, like, the leaves might be a little bit lighter colored, that's not a great way of telling them apart, but what really sets it apart is the rounded lobes are still there, but there's not that cleft in the leaves themselves. So if it's pretty much just a solid circle with a little bit of an indentation, then that's more than likely Amazon frogbit. Of course, you know, we're dealing with nature here, so there's variation within all of these, but these are sort of generalities that can hopefully help you differentiate between European frogbit and some of its lookalikes. So those are the 2 frogbit species you might run across depending on where you are in the Great Lakes region. Hopefully Amazon would only be when you're at the pet store, but it's possible someone would release it and it potentially could survive through the summer. The next lookalike species are water lilies. And now, generally speaking, water lilies the leaves are much larger than those, 2-inch to 5 centimeter European frogbit leaves. So that's your first cue right there, bigger leaves. Spatterdock has yellow flowers that are kind of like golf balls, but it does still have the rounded lobes. This one's it's pretty easy to differentiate. Young leaves might be a little tricky. The one that's much trickier is young white water lilies look a whole lot like European frogbit leaves. And young white water lilies usually have just one or two leaves, and they are in a floating state. That's how the plant disperses itself. So they have leaves that are about the right size to be European frogbit, even pretty close in color. The key there is that they have pointed lobes on them. They kind of look like Pac-Man with the cleft and the pointed lobes. But then also, if you were to grab that immature white water lily by the leaves, thinking it's frogbit, and you're going to pull it out, you pull it up, and at the bottom, it'll have a tuber, which is just a brown, sort of thumb shape and sized tuber at the bottom. And that's frogbit does not have that. That's where those feathery leaves really come into play for identifying it and differentiating it from immature white water lilies. So if it's got that tuber, you're in the clear. You don't have frogbit. You've got a white water lily. The next guy, plant that's could potentially be mistaken for European frogbit, and in Michigan, we've gotten a number of calls over the years of people reporting this as European frogbit. Concerned citizens on a lake. Is a water shield. It can form surface covering. I wouldn't go so far as to call them mats, but surface covering a leaf across like small bays and areas. So people see that and they worry that they have European frogbit. But the leaf shape, again, is really the key characteristic for identifying. Water shield, they kind of look like little footballs. They don't have any lobes or clefts at all. They're very complete leaves. And then the stem actually attaches to the very center of the leaf, where frogbit, it attaches right at that cleft. And then there's also this like slimy gelatinous coating on the stems of water shield. So if you're ever in doubt, just reach down and see if the stem is slimy. It's actually a pretty cool plant. And the flower itself is very different. Not white, not three-lobed. So if it's flowering, that's another easy characteristic to differentiate it from European frogbit. But they can be similar colored leaves, they can be similar-ish sized, but that shape and lack of lobes is really the key characteristic for differentiating it from water shield. And the last one I'll cover is even less likely to be mistaken for European frogbit, and I'm not sure that it has before, but just in case, we'll play it safe. The duckweed species, there are a number in the Great Lakes region that are native of various sizes, as you can see over on this one. But some of the larger duckweed species could maybe be mistaken at first glance for very young European frogbit plants. Freshly sprouted turions are somewhat similar to duckweed, but the key there is to look at the root structures, and duckweed species have just single strands of roots. They don't have feathery roots at all. So you're in the clear there. And actually that sprouted turion often won't have roots at all yet. It'll still have sort of that little bulb of a turion stuck to the bottom of it when the leaves are that way. So if you see roots like this, you've got duckweed and you're in the clear again. So that is kind of the identification portion. Hopefully that helps you guys to be able to see frogbit and recognize it and differentiate it from some of its common lookalikes. This is a nice picture of some European frogbit flowers. Those clear 3 petals are kind of nice and really differentiate. And that's some smaller duckweed there off to the side too. So a little bit of couple species there to look at. So now I'd like to transition us over to ecology and biology. And when I say that, I'm going to talk about sort of habitat that it likes to be in, reproductive strategies, how it spreads, some of the impacts that it has when it does become invaded, or when it does invade a habitat. And so let's get into that one. So the first thing to think about with European frogbit is habitat. It is capable of surviving in a myriad of conditions and places, so long as there's basically standing water. And in Michigan, we've got it in stormwater ponds. We have it in drainage ditches. It's in Great Lakes wetlands. It's in inland lakes. It's in drowned river mouths. Pretty much where there's water, frogbit will be all right and probably do okay. But that water has to be slow moving. You're not going to find frogbit in a fast moving stream or in large wave action. So this photo here is actually some Phragmites someone treated. And then look, you can see all of this is frogbit that's just popped up afterwards. There was probably frogbit within the Phragmites when it was treated or prior to treatment, but it was just sort of shaded out and maybe at low abundance due to the Phragmites being there. But once you kill the Phragmites and open up the water surface to daylight, the frogbit just loves that calm sort of refuge area within the Phragmites stems, and then we'll start to send those runners sort of out into the water until it gets to a point where it's not calm enough for it to be anymore. So this is maybe where you guys don't want to be, is managing frag, getting it all nicely buttoned up for a year, and then having frogbit come in and become a secondary invader. So it really can show up in wetlands. It showed up in stormwater ponds and wetlands in the middle of Oakland County, where we're not even sure. That's in the Detroit area, for those who don't know. We're not really sure how it got there. So we'll talk about how it spreads and moves around, but sometimes it's a mystery how it shows up. And the fact that it can asexually reproduce means you really only need to move one plant to set up a population, and it may take that population a while to get up to this level, but just one plant is all it takes to set up a population of frogbit. So let's talk a little bit about reproduction. I mentioned before that frogbit does produce flowers and it does produce seeds in Michigan and in the Great Lakes area. Those flowers tend to be more prevalent in populations that are more dense. And that's maybe a personal observation from the few years I've been doing this, is real sparse frogbit tends to not have much flowering happen, where dense frogbit tends to produce a lot of flowers. I'm not sure, that'd be an interesting study design for someone to take up, but sort of a anecdotal observation. But it does produce flowers and it does produce seeds. The literature about this and seed production suggests that the seeds can be somewhat viable. Some studies have found that the seeds are low viability. We're not 100% sure how that really plays out. Some partners at Central Michigan University collected some seeds and did some laboratory sprouting tests, and they found the seeds were highly viable and sprouted in the laboratory conditions, but we haven't really tested that any time that I'm aware of in Michigan. But so we know seeds can play a role, or probably do play a role, in its spreading and coming back. But for the most part, we believe that those turions, those asexual reproductive structures, which you can see the little tic tacs developing here, those guys are probably most likely responsible for frogbit coming back at a site and returning year after year. So one of these guys sprouts to become a single plant. That plant, over the course of the summer, sends out runners and daughter plants, and the literature says that a single plant can cover up to around a square meter after a single season of growth, with all that clonal reproduction. And then each of those plants from that clonal population can produce numerous turions, somewhere in the range of 10 or so. I have not counted that. That's a number from the literature as well. But if you think about that, a square meter of plants is probably a few hundred plants, and those plants are all producing about 10 turions that are going to come back in the subsequent year or two. And the understanding of turion longevity is a couple of years, and I don't have a more precise answer than that, but they definitely survive the winters and come back in the spring. And the thought is they can live for a couple of years. And so even if you were to treat and remove all the frog bit in an area, you're still going to have probably a couple of years where turions will be sprouting, that you need to be returning to that site if you're trying to really eradicate frog bit. This is a nice photo of a turion sprouted. Ignore that stem, that's not part of the plant. The turion is probably underneath it where you can't see it, but those are how small the leaves are, which, you know, kind of look like some of the larger duckweed species. So basically we have seeds. Not sure how many, how viable those are, but they probably play some role in spread and returning after a season. But those clonal turions are really the key there. And yeah, I'll save the rest for the next couple more slides. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the spread. And frog bait can spread if folks move plants around on their equipment. Adult plants, if you have the rosette portion, even if the leaves are all ripped off, a lot of times those will sprout new leaves once they get favorable habitat. So you can spread it with adult live plants. You can also, as a floating plant, this is a picture of frog bit in the lower Grand River, a mat of it floating down. It was growing probably along the column areas of the sides where there's cattails, and something dislodged it, and now it's floating down the middle of the Grand River on its way out to Lake Michigan, where it probably won't survive, but maybe some of those rosettes will move up or down the coast and find some nook or cranny where they can settle in and start a new population. We don't have a great sense of if wildlife spreads European frog bit. There's certainly the possibility. You know, ducks probably would eat the seeds and or turions, so they may digest plant parts and have non-digested portions left somewhere else to further spread. We've definitely seen, while out doing field work, sort of a correlation between muskrat dens and frog bit. There tends to be frog bit around them, so I'm not sure if they're actively moving it or if it's sort of getting stuck to them and they're bringing it back towards their nest. But muskrats might be playing a role in frog bit spread. But we know that human activity definitely causes, or is probably the most likely result of it moving large distances. So it showed up in Michigan all the way on the west side of the state in the middle of Kent County in Grand Rapids, when prior to that, frog bit was basically on the east side of the state. So it moved there either on someone's boating gear or potentially some construction equipment. We're not exactly sure. But we think that humans mainly are responsible for the large distance jumps that frog bit makes. We tend to find it in Michigan in waterfowl hunting sites. So we think maybe waterfowl hunters are moving it around, probably unintentionally. But we don't necessarily know if waterfowl themselves aren't moving it around some. My take on that is probably not too much, since we didn't see a huge inland spread of the plants into Michigan. And if waterfowl were really moving a lot of plant, or high likely of moving the plant, I think we would have seen a lot more spread into the inland areas where there aren't hunters, but there are waterfowl using it. Talk a little bit about the negative impacts of frog bit. And if you've seen me do a frog bit slide before, you know I always include this photo because I like to pick on Drew. But this is just a small like estuary area near Alpena, and it's just, as you can see, loaded with frog bit. All this back behind you, other than the water lilies, is frog bit. you can see the white flowers, and these two folks are picking it up, and it's just a solid mat, and that's that intertwining strawberry runner type growth, and it just sort of forms these big thick mats. So those mats are really the main thing that we believe is the negative impact. Clearly it changes this near shore area. You know, maybe you would have had fish spawning in there, or you know, small juvenile fish using it as refuge. Well, now it's just a solid mass of frogbit, so that habitat becomes unavailable to those species. It also, you know, will change the flow of water. You know, it likes calm areas, but it's going to make this area even more calm. So then you end up with more deposition there. You don't necessarily get fresh water moving through there. It also, as a plant, you know, during the daytime, it's creating oxygen, but it also does some respiration, so it can decrease oxygen levels in its beds, especially at the end of the season when the plants are dying. It can create a lot of oxygen demand with the breakdown of those plants and drop dissolved oxygen levels, which could impact some wildlife. You know, this might be harder for you know, frogs or turtles or amphibians to use. There's not a ton of research on that, but definitely you can see, you would imagine that this is not functioning how it used to when there wasn't frogbit there from that sense. Also, this can impact recreation. You know, clearly, you know, if this was a place where you could kayak once before, this is a lot harder to kayak through or fish in. You know, you're not gonna catch much in that area. So it definitely has impacts to recreation. There's not a lot of data on sort of the financial impact on recreation, but you know, clearly that's just not a system that's working the way it used to prior to frogbit being there. Now, everybody likes to dog on invasive species and how bad they are, but I like to throw this slide in there just because not everything is always bad all the time to everything. So for you Phragmites folks, I have this guy. You know, there's the potential to use plants, including European frogbit, for phytoremediation. Frogbit is known to sequester some heavy metals, so it could be used somewhere to remediate something. I would hope not in its invasive range, but maybe in its native range. Someone might use it for that, but you know that, and it may help a site that it invades that has heavy metals reduce those heavy metals potentially. You know, maybe I'm grabbing at straws there, but a little bit. But there's the potential for some positive impacts with that. And then also it is habitat. While it may exclude fish and some other things as, you know, makes it poor habitat for them, it may be ideal habitat for other macroinvertebrates or other creatures and small guys to live. So, you know, we consider it a negative as humans, but it might not be negative to everything. Ducks, you know, are known to eat the turion, so that's helpful for them. So it's not all bad. It's just like to throw that out there to folks. So we got our ecology and biology out of the way. I'll talk a little bit about monitoring. I won't spend a ton of time on it, but a little bit. I want to make sure we touch on it. So we'll get right into it. And prior to the meeting starting, I learned that this is Fraggy, and he's a native Phragmites plant. I didn't know that. I just stole him off the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative website, not knowing his name or his role, but he's a native frag guy. And here he is filling in some monitoring data for the European Frogbit Collaborative, but that I'll get to in a second. PAMF is now starting to include some European frogbit information. So if you're out on site doing PAMF locations, you will be doing some frogbit monitoring, whether you know it or not. But more broadly and more inclusively, within the Great Lakes region, there is now a European Frogbit Collaborative. Apologize, that's what EFB stands for, European Frogbit Collaborative. That's been around for a little while, but it recently just got a big boost and is now also being sort of run by the Great Lakes Commission, similar to the Frag Collaborative. And monitoring is a big portion of the Frogbit Collaborative. What that collaborative is trying to do is get a sense of where frogbit is within the Great Lakes region and where it is not. And monitoring plays an important role in that. So if your organization is interested, I have some more information on the collaborative later, but I would highly recommend you get involved and help us do some monitoring and improving management and monitoring of frogbit in the Great Lakes region. All right, I think that's good for Fraggy, and we'll move on. Yeah, to reporting. Got a little confused there, sorry. So I have this guy up here. This is the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. This is one of the reporting mechanisms Michigan uses a lot, but not every state probably uses that. And so, but reporting frogbit, if you find it, is actually very important. Whether you're at a PAMP site, then you're probably reporting it that way. But if you're not at a PAMP site and you see frogbit, it's still also important to help notify responsible parties who may want to do management actions on that site, or even just for the Frogbit Collaborative to get a better understanding of where frogbit is and is not within the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of different options for reporting, and as I said before, I kind of have this Michigan centric focus, so I'm not sure that I necessarily know what works for you, but in your area, but you know, there are regional groups. So in Michigan, we have cooperative invasive species management areas, or SISMAs. I know other states have PRISMs, which is a similar acronym that I don't know off the top of my head, or other regional groups. You know, as a state of Michigan employee with Eagle, we're interested in knowing where frogbit is. So you might have a state or provincial agency that you need to notify. And then the other one is you can eventually notify the European Frogbit Collaborative. We're still building the website, and we have some apps for reporting, but that's not quite built out just yet. But reporting is very important. You know, you may know that frogbit is there, but it's important to make sure the folks that maybe are going to be able to do management or are interested in partnering with you to do management are aware of where frogbit is and is not. So make sure you report frogbit if you see it. All right, so that was a pretty quick and brief on reporting. I don't have all the answers for it, but I wanted to highlight it because it is a very important piece of the puzzle for getting frogbit managed and reducing the impacts of frogbit on the landscape, waterscape. So next I want to move into prevention and talk to you guys a little bit about that. Before I get deep into prevention, hopefully this is something you guys are familiar with. This is the invasion curve. And I just put it on here just to sort of highlight the idea of how invasive species can move into an area and the impacts they have with it. So we have sort of either, you can think of this the x-axis as being the population of the species, or time, so starting at 0 and moving their way up, and then you can think of the y-axis as the cost of managing or preventing that species from coming in, or the amount of effort you have to spend on that species. So you start out with essentially none in there, and you're just spending some money on prevention. That species comes in, you have a brief window where you're probably going to be able to maybe eradicate that species. And then after that, the cat's out of the bag at that site. You're not going to be able to eradicate it. All you can do is put efforts towards controlling it and keeping it from spreading out to other sites. And then at the very end of that scale, you get into asset-based protection. And that's basically, it's all over the place. We are going to spend our money not on stopping it from spreading out, but stopping it from getting in. So you're protecting some high quality habitat or threatened and endangered species or something along those lines, but you have areas that you're trying to keep it out of rather than areas that you're trying to kind of keep it into. That's kind of how I think of the invasion curve. And I just wanted to sort of highlight this whole idea that prevention isn't free. You're still doing education and outreach, trying to reach people to make them aware of what frogbit is and make sure they're doing what they can to either control it or stop the spread of it. And in that prevention section, there's a few different things that you can do. And education and outreach is one of those things. Folks, duck hunters who don't know anything about frogbit, may not clean their trailer off because they don't know that what they're doing is bad, that they're spreading something that they're not supposed to be spreading. Their focus is not the aquatic plants, it's the ducks, and so that might be something they don't know about. So the key is to educate those folks. And there's a number of different pathways to do that. And I'm not going to go into lots of detail, but social media is good. This is an example of a sign that we in Eagle and some partners posted at a number of different frogbit sites in Michigan, just to alert folks that it's there. It's at boat launches and public access sites. So they are aware that frogbit is in that water body and they need to do something about it. And we've actually also sent letters out to residents on water bodies, just so they know that the species is in the water body that they live on, that there will be, folks out there doing management, hand pulling or chemical treatment of the plants. And so they're not totally caught off guard with what this group of people is doing in waders out in the wetland across from their house. So education and outreach is really important for prevention. It's also really important once you have the species present in the site. So you can keep it from spreading from one site to the next. You can keep it from getting into a site. Education and having informed residents and stakeholders is really key. So it's a cost whether you have that plant in that system or not, but it definitely goes up once you have that plant in there, because then you're doing signage, you're doing letters, you're reaching out to the folks that are there. So education and outreach is one important piece of prevention, but really the big piece is decontamination, or that clean, drain, dry sort of idea. And that's a lot of times what that outreach message is getting folks aware of that they need to clean off their stuff so they're not going to move frogbit seeds, turions, or plants, or any invasive species from one location to the other. And for me, sometimes folks get hung up on, well, I don't know how to identify invasive species or all the invasive species, so I'm not sure how to decontaminate. But decontamination is really about cleaning your stuff off. It's getting rid of all the plants, whether they're native or not. It's removing the mud and the dirt that might have seeds for European frogbit or any other plant that doesn't want to get moved around, or animal. So decontamination is really a huge piece of keeping frogbit from spreading all over the place, because while it can spread within the water body through water currents and maybe wildlife, those sorts of things, getting it having it introduced into a whole new water body or making a long jump is almost certainly likely due to human activities. And so if we can get people to clean off their stuff, we can hopefully slow the spread of the species and lots of invasive species. And decon is a great thing to promote across the board, terrestrial, aquatic, all the way around. You can really slow down the spread of invasives that way. All right, so we wrapped up prevention and we're now getting into control. And hopefully we're not too far off on time. I think I probably rambled a little bit. Here's another thick bed of frogbit, basically covering the entire surface. But to talk about control, there's a few different ways you can do European frogbit control. Physical and mechanical removal is often one that people lean towards and say they want to do. Here's a picture of folks manually removing frogbit, just going in and hand pulling all the little plants out. It's certainly time consuming, but it can be very effective in the short term. You can go in, and because it's a floating plant, it's relatively easy to remove. You're not like digging in the sediment. You're not spending a lot of time having to separate it out from other plants. You can grab the surface and scoop it up and get it right out of there. So it's an option. It's not generally going to get you to eradication, but it's a good way to, keep a boat launch clear so that boats coming in and out aren't going to be moving frog bit around as easily. It's not going to get stuck on their trailers and things. So that's really the main physical or mechanical control we've used in Michigan, and we've used it a fair bit. One of the downsides to it is if you have really dense frog bit, it just takes a ton of time. So it's really ideal for smaller, more sparse populations of European frog bit. And then the other mechanical or physical options are shading or drawdowns. I'm not terribly familiar with either of these and haven't used them. There's some literature on shading that suggests it can reduce the growth, but it's difficult because you have to shade, the whole area, and you're shading the native plants, and so you're probably going to have some non-target impacts with that shading option. And there's probably maintenance to keep the shades from getting torn up in the wind, and I don't know, just not something we've tried in Michigan. And then drawdowns have been done a little bit in the literature. We've contemplated them in Michigan, and we haven't actually executed one yet. The idea with the drawdown is you get rid of the water, and so frog bit doesn't survive. I think the question there that really is unanswered is, do the turions survive that drying? Do the seeds survive that drying time? So you may be able to get control in the short term, but once you reflood that area, it may come right back. And I don't know the answer to that one. The main way that Michigan has been working with, at least the group I'm in, has been working with frog bit, especially in denser, larger populations, is with herbicide applications. They're much quicker to do than a hand pulling event. It's much smaller number of people. I don't personally do, our Eagle doesn't do the treatments ourselves. We contract those out to contractors, herbicide applicators, but it is very effective. There's a number of herbicides that can be used. There are some good ones. We generally lean towards using, I'm not going to get the active ingredient right, but Clipper is the trade name for what we tend to have folks use. It has less non-target impacts than some of the other ones like Diquat, but it is certainly less expensive in the long run than having a whole lot of people out there doing hand pulls, and it's fairly quick and it's very effective. But that said, with any control action you take, there are some considerations that you need to make. One is setting realistic management goals. We've been working at one site since 2017, and our goal has been eradication. And we kind of knew we probably wouldn't get there, but we wanted to try, and we've been using it as a learning area for different management techniques. And so, once frog bit is really established, if you think of that invasion curve, you're probably not going to eradicate it. So you have to be realistic. Are you just trying to keep it from spreading out of that site? Are you trying to allow people to do, certain types of recreation at that location? What are your goals there? Since this is a broad group with many states and jurisdictions, it's important for you to know your laws and permits for whatever management treatment actions you might want to take. You may or may not be able to do what you want because of permit requirements or laws that prohibit you from doing certain things. So make sure you figure out what you need to do there. And then ultimately, what we've tried with our management techniques is to do the management prior to seed production or turion production, because then you're eliminating those plants from coming back the next year. Sometimes you find a population late and you manage it anyways. Basically what you're doing is reducing those plants there, but if it's already produced seeds or turions, you're going to have to come back and do more work there in subsequent years. And then a consideration is you got to be diligent with any site that you start working on and doing management on. Herbicide treatments often are several a year. It's never ever been a one and done kind of situation. Even hand pulling, you go in and you hand pull an area, but turions seem to sprout midsummer in those areas because plants will show back up, or you just missed some either with your herbicide or your hand pulling efforts. So making sure you're going back to that site regularly, and ideally taking management action as often as you need to is important. Springtime is a good time to look for frog bit when all the other plants aren't quite as far out, overgrown, spatterdock and things that make it hard to find frog bit. And it's sometimes easier to treat during those parts, but it's also easy to miss a couple plants. So making sure you're going back to those sites and doing follow-up monitoring and collecting data and collecting any of those plants or retreating that area. And I think with that, I have a couple additional resources. I'd mentioned the European Phragmites Collaborative. They recently launched a website, which is available or is up here, and that is run similar to the Frag Collaborative by the Great Lakes Commission, or implemented. I don't know what the right word is there. And then I also, again, my selfish lens of Michigan focused, wanted to give you the link to the Michigan Invasive Species Program's website, and specifically the one to frog bit. There's a nice status and strategy document down at the bottom of that webpage where you can learn about, albeit Michigan focused, European frog bit, and some more life history and more information on herbicide treatment and stuff that I didn't cover here. And with that, I would say thank you. I want to acknowledge my coworkers, Sarah Lesage, Billy Kuiper, and Kevin Walters for all the frog bit work that we've been doing and they've been doing with me over the years. The Phragmites Collaborative, I also want to thank, a lot of the monitoring efforts and the apps and stuff are all from the collaborative's efforts. And then I want to thank the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative for having me here today to talk to you. And the obligatory required Eagle last slide is here. And I think I'm ready to do questions if we have any. How did I do for time, Teresa?
We're almost right at 11:30. But I think
Yeah.
if people are able, if you're able to stay on and people are able to stay on, I told them to put them in the chat. So we can have a quick Q&A.
Yes, definitely. I can stay on. Yeah. See, I rambled even more than I thought
I was like, should I cut him off? But I was like, I feel like this is important and people want to hear it. So
all right. Okay.
I am gonna have James, I'll put up a slide real quick. I'm gonna have James help us with the Q&A real quick.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing.
Yes.
All right, Tom. So the first question we have here is from Ken. He asks, is it known how much concern the spread can be from fragmentation? And also what parts of the plant can spread from fragmentation?
Yeah, good question. Individual leaves don't create new plants. It's essentially just those rosettes, that center piece where the leaves come out, the roots come out, the flowers come out. If that moves around, that can sprout new leaves and grow. And then obviously the turions can, but yeah, individual stems or pieces of root, chunks of, it's not like, starry stonewort or Eurasian water milfoil, where little chunks can grow into whole new plants, unless, with the exception of that rosette. I think that was the question, right? Did I get it, Ken?
Yes, you did. Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Good.
All right, great. And Brian asks, do you have any information on dormancy of the turion?
Yeah, I don't have a great sense of that. The literature that I've seen, that we've been able to dig up, some of it's pretty old, says several years for turions. But that's really some of those life history questions that the Phragmites Collaborative will hopefully find some researchers who want to tackle that and figure out, because that's really going to be important to figuring out if you can eradicate it or how long you have to continue to go to a site before you've stopped propagular pressure or reproduction at that site. It's a really important question, Brian, and I wish I knew, but we don't yet.
All right, and then there was one last a comment. He says more of a comment than a question, but Nate says, we have a manuscript in progress where we characterize the hypoxia driven by frogbit and the change in invertebrate diversity. So essentially we sampled air-breathing snails in dense stands of frogbit and not very much of anything else. So Nate, I'm not sure if you wanted to ask any question associated to that, or Tom, if you have any thoughts or a response to
No,
that.
that's awesome, Nate. I'm excited to learn more about that. That's, a lot of times we get people asking about what the negative impacts are or what the impacts of frogbit are, and we don't have a lot of current peer-reviewed stuff to cite. So that sounds pretty sweet. I mean, not that it's good news, but that we have something that we can cite will be really nice. Nate, I think you need to join the European Phragmites Collaborative. How about that?
Well, I'll talk to the student and make sure she gets involved too. So
Nice.
All right, looks like we have one more question popped up. Rebecca asks, is it like other invasives that leaf out earlier in the spring or stay green longer in the fall to help with identification and treatment times?
Yeah, so it will leaf out a little earlier. I mean, those turions will sprout once the water temperatures reach the upper 50s, I think. And a lot of times you'll get some plants that are out at that time, but finding it is a little easier in that earlier part of the summer before you have, canopy cover. I don't know necessarily. We've seen it still sort of viable looking into October in Michigan. So it definitely sticks around. I'm not sure if it's later than other plants though. I haven't really spent time thinking about that. It seems like it maybe breaks down a little earlier than some of the other, floating leaf plants and things like that. Was that the question, James, or did I butcher that one?
I would have to ask Rebecca, but it looks like she's no longer on.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'll say you nailed it.
All right, awesome.
And Kurt said you did a great job, but there are no other questions that I see.
Nice.
Excellent. Thanks, Kurt. Oh, someone just asked if it's edible.
Oh.
That's a great question. I haven't tried it. I did see something. Where was it? I think it's in the status and strategy document that's on the Michigan's invasive species website. I think it mentions something about it has some compound that's linked to like reduce slowing aging or something like that. But there was no other information than that. So I would be remiss if I was promoting that. But I don't know how you get that compound. I don't think you eat it. I'm not sure. Maybe you'd extract it or something. We do see some herbivory of frogbit, but I don't know. And so there's potential. Maybe there was a collaborative meeting, a frogbit collaborative meeting recently, and there's some work being done by the feds to look at biocontrol, classical biocontrol. So going back to its native habitat and finding something that eats it. But biocontrol is a very slow process. It takes them years to find something, and then it takes usually years for it to be tested and approved to make sure it only eats the thing you want it to eat and doesn't go around eating everything else. So maybe eventually there'll be some biocontrol. So that definitely things eat it. We've seen leaves with lots of chew marks in them. So something eats it. I just don't know if people can.
Cool. Anything else, James?
Nope. Looks like that's it.
Okay. So thank you, of course, for presenting. And obviously, I think this was a really great resource. And I hope if you thought so too, and you want to share it with colleagues or other people in your agency, like I said, these are all recorded, and we'll share out a recording with your Eventbrite registration. And then it also get posted on our website. So use this as a resource. I think Tom has a lot of great information, and hopefully, other people can see it too. And then just to promote, went too fast. We have our next webinar next month, May 23rd, and Dan Tippery of University of Wisconsin Whitewater is going to present on molecular genomics and how that is being used to investigate hybridization of Phragmites. So I know a lot of you guys in the collaborative have had lots of questions about hybrid frag. Where is it? How do we prove it's a hybrid? What do we do if we find it? So I'm hoping this is going to be a really interesting talk, and this will be our last webinar because we give obviously everyone a break for the summer field season until fall. So thank you guys for joining and watching. And then of course we want to thank our folks at USGS and then our funding that makes this possible. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, James, for helping out today. And thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody. It was great to be here. Again, my contact info was on that first slide. So if you ever have questions or want to share peer-reviewed publications, would love it.